"Do you have any expired cake for my daughter?" asked the homeless mother. But the millionaire saw everything. The manager laughed, called an employee to watch the show, and accused the woman of faking poverty. The public humiliation would have been forgotten if it hadn't been witnessed by the real owner of the bakery. The following week, the manager was standing in the unemployment line, and the woman was entering HR at the very company that once threw her out. May drizzle fell over Michigan Avenue as Mariah held tightly to Isabel's small hand. At 32, she seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime on her slumped shoulders and in the tired gaze that avoided the eyes of hurried passers-by. The clothes she wore had been washed so many times they had lost their original color. Her worn-out coat barely protected her from the Chicago chill that insisted on seeping through the holes in the fabric. Beside her, Isabel walked in silence, her 7 years of age marked by a maturity no child should have. They stopped, in front of the window of Sweet Charm Patisserie, an elegant establishment located in the Gold Coast, where artistically decorated cakes and refined pastries attracted the neighborhood's high-income clientele. Mariah had no intention of going inside. She knew that was no place for people like her. But Isabel pressed her nose against the glass, her eyes wide at the creations of sugar and chocolate that seemed to belong to a fantasy world. "It's your birthday today," Mariah thought, feeling her heart clench in her chest. 7 years old. Her little girl was turning 7, and all she had to offer was the emptiness of her own hands. There was no wrapped gift, no candle to blow out, not even a decent meal to celebrate the day. For 3 days, they had eaten just enough to keep from fainting. The money she had managed to earn from odd cleaning jobs had been spent on medicine for Isabel's persistent cough. Mariah looked around. Night was beginning to fall over Chicago, and the city lights were coming on one by one, creating a cruel contrast between the opulence of the shop windows and the grey reality that surrounded them. She knew that many bakeries discarded products at the end of the day. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance of getting something. It didn't have to be a whole cake, a slice, a leftover, anything that could turn this day into something minimally special for Isabel. With a courage she didn't know where she found, Mariah pushed open the glass door and entered the patisserie. The sound of a small bell announced her arrival, and she immediately felt all eyes turned to her. The contrast was stark. While the customers wore elegant clothes and carried bags from designer stores, Mariah and Isabel looked like they had come from another planet. The girl shrank against her mother, sensing the hostile atmosphere that enveloped them. Behind the counter, Edward Travers, the store manager, watched the two with a look that mixed contempt and sadistic satisfaction. At 45, Edward had built his career by stepping on those he considered inferior. He wore a well-tailored suit and sported an expensive watch on his wrist. For him, the patisserie wasn't just a workplace. It was a stage where he could exercise the little power life had granted him. Mariah waited. 2 customers were being served, choosing between French tarts and German cakes, debating between imported red berry fillings and Belgian chocolate frostings. She stood in a corner, trying to make herself invisible, waiting for the right moment to approach. Isabel squeezed her hand tightly, her eyes fixed on the polished marble floor that reflected the golden lights of the central chandelier. The minutes dragged on. More customers came and went. Mariah continued to wait, her presence ignored by everyone except Edward, who watched her with a cruel smile on his lips. He knew exactly what she wanted and was delighting in the discomfort he caused by making her wait. Finally, when the store emptied and only one couple remained choosing pastries to go, Mariah gathered her courage and approached the counter. Her voice came out so low it could barely be heard. "Excuse me for bothering you. I was wondering if by any chance you have anything you're going to throw out today. Anything will do. It's just that today is my daughter's birthday, and She couldn't finish the sentence. Shame burned her cheeks, and her voice failed. Isabel hid even more behind her mother's legs, feeling the weight of the situation even without fully understanding it. Edward didn't answer immediately. He crossed his arms, tilted his head to the side, and let a heavy silence fill the air. Then, just as Mariah was about to apologize and leave, he spoke. But he didn't speak softly. He spoke loudly, very loudly, ensuring that everyone in the patisserie could hear every word. "Well, look what we have here. I guess this patisserie has become a spot for beggars now. Clara, come see this." Clara, a young employee of 23 who had only been working there for 6 months, emerged from the kitchen wiping her hands on a cloth. Her face showed immediate discomfort upon realizing the situation, but she said nothing. Edward continued, "This one here wants us to give her free food, thinks this is the Salvation Army. Look at her clothes. Look at the state of her. And she has the nerve to bring the child along, probably to make us feel sorry for her." Mariah felt tears burn her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had learned, over the last few months, that crying in front of cruel people only increased their pleasure. Isabel, on the other hand, couldn't hold back. Small, silent, tears began to stream down her cheeks as she clung to her mother. "I didn't mean to bother you," Mariah murmured. "I'll leave. I'm sorry." "Oh, you're leaving? No, wait. Let me explain something to you. Here, we work. We work hard to make these quality products. None of this is garbage. If you want to eat, you work. Get a job, earn your money, and come back here as a customer. But don't come here with your hand out, because this is not a charity." The couple still in the store exchanged uncomfortable glances. The woman whispered something to her husband, who just shrugged. No one said anything. No one interfered. Mariah felt the world collapse on top of her. With an automatic movement, she turned to leave, pulling Isabel with her. It was then that something fell from her pocket. A $50 bill, folded and crumpled, slipped from the old coat and landed on the floor. Mariah didn't even notice. Her only thought was to get out of there, to escape the humiliation, to protect her daughter from that toxic environment. An elderly gentleman who had entered the patisserie moments before watched the bill fall. With slow steps, leaning on a wooden cane, he bent down with difficulty and picked up the money. He looked at Mariah, who was already at the door, then at Edward. "Sir, this lady dropped this. It's hers." Edward looked at the bill, then at the gentleman, and an even crueler smile formed on his face. With a swift movement, he took the money from the old man's hand. "Thank you, Mr. Jones. This one really tried to fool me, saying she had no money, that she was in need. And look at this. $50 in her pocket. Good thing you saw it. People like her have no limits." The gentleman frowned, confused. That wasn't what he had seen. The woman clearly didn't know she had the money in her pocket, probably carefully saved for an emergency. But Edward had already put the bill in the cash register, returning to arrange the pastries in the display case as if nothing had happened. Clara stood frozen behind the counter, her hands clutching the cloth tightly. She wanted to say something. She knew this was wrong, but she was afraid. Afraid of losing her job, afraid of becoming Edward's next target. So she remained, silent, swallowing the lump in her throat and feeling shame burn inside her. On the other side of the patisserie, in a discreet corner near the window, a man had watched everything. Thomas Miller was 40 years old, with a face marked by life. Grey hairs were starting to appear at his temples, and fine lines around his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. He was sitting alone at a small table, a cup of now-cold coffee in front of him, forgotten. He had entered the patisserie half an hour earlier, seeking a moment of respite in a routine that had become mechanical and empty. Thomas didn't just watch, he acted. With discreet movements, he took out his cell phone and started recording. He captured every word from Edward, every cruel gesture, every expression of despair on Mariah's face. His hand trembled slightly as he held the phone up, hidden behind a menu on the table. Something inside him, something that had been dormant for a long time, awoke in that moment. When Mariah and Isabel finally left the patisserie, Thomas put his phone away and remained motionless for a few moments. The other people in the shop returned to their conversations, their pastries, their lives, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. For them, it was just another uncomfortable moment they would rather forget. For Thomas, it was something different. He stood up, left a few bills on the table without waiting for change, and walked out of the patisserie. The light drizzle had stopped, but the air was still damp and cold. The streets of the Gold Coast were filled with luxury cars and elegant pedestrians. Thomas looked both ways until he spotted Mariah and Isabel turning a corner. Without much thought, without questioning his own motives, he began to follow. Them? He kept his distance. He didn't want to scare them. He just wanted to understand. To understand who they were, where they were going, how they lived. Mariah walked quickly despite her evident exhaustion, pulling Isabel by the hand. The girl stumbled from time to time, but her mother supported her without stopping. They crossed several streets, leaving the wealthy neighborhoods behind until they reached a simpler area, then another even more run-down. Thomas followed them for almost an hour. The path stretched from the comfort of the Gold Coast to the banks of the Chicago River, where the city showed its cruelest side. Abandoned buildings, vacant lots, homeless people huddled under overpasses. Mariah and Isabel finally stopped at an old industrial warehouse that appeared to have been decommissioned for years. From across the street, hidden behind a lit lamppost, Thomas watched the two enter the warehouse. He waited a few minutes before approaching cautiously. Through a crack in the rusty metal wall, he could see inside. What he saw made his heart ache in a way he hadn't felt for a long time. The warehouse was enormous, but completely empty, except for a corner where Mariah had improvised. A home. There were a few blue plastic tarps spread on the floor, creating a base over the cold, damp concrete. On the tarps, old, torn blankets served as a bed. A few plastic bags contained carefully folded clothes. An old thermos, probably found in the trash, sat next to some plastic cups. And that was it. There was nothing else. Mariah knelt on the blankets and opened her arms to Isabel, who nestled against her. Even from a distance, Thomas could see Mariah's shoulders shaking. She was crying, finally allowing herself to release the emotion she had held back. In the patisserie. Isabel was no longer crying. She just lay quietly in her mother's arms, stroking her face with her small hands. Then Mariah pulled back a little, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and tried to smile. Thomas saw her lips move, and even without hearing the words, understood what was happening. She was singing "Happy Birthday" to her daughter. Mariah's voice was shaky but sweet, filled with love, even in the absence of everything else. There was no cake, no candles, no presents or party, just a mother singing happy birthday to her daughter, in an abandoned warehouse on the banks of a polluted river. When she finished singing, Mariah kissed Isabel's forehead and whispered something in her ear. Isabel answered something, so quietly that Thomas couldn't even catch the movement of her lips. But he saw Mariah hug her daughter against her chest again, as if wanting to protect her from all the evil in the world with the strength of her arms. Thomas stepped away from the crack and leaned his back against the cold warehouse wall. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to process everything he had witnessed that day. Something was happening inside him, something he couldn't name. It was anger, yes, anger at Edward, anger at the system that allowed people like Mariah and Isabel to live like this. But it was more than that. It was also a deep, old pain that he had buried long ago, and that was now resurfacing with full force. He thought of Claire, his wife, 3 years since she had passed, taken by a situation he preferred not to remember. 3 years of self-imposed solitude, of detachment from the world, of a mechanical existence. Wake up, work, go home, sleep, repeat. No. Real connections. No purpose beyond surviving another day. But now, looking at that warehouse where a mother and daughter slept without safety, without comfort, without hope, Thomas felt something change inside him. It was as if a switch had been flipped on after years of being off. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew he couldn't just walk away and forget what he had seen. Night fell completely over Chicago. The city lights shone in the distance. But in that area by the river, the darkness was almost total, broken only by a few yellowed streetlights. Thomas stayed there for a while longer, leaning against the warehouse wall, lost in thought. Inside the makeshift shelter, Mariah finally managed to get Isabel to sleep. The girl was exhausted, physically and emotionally. Mariah covered her with all the blankets they had, then lay down beside her, hugging her to share body heat. The night's cold seeped through the cracks in the warehouse, and the distant sound of cars on the nearby avenue created an urban and melancholic soundtrack. Mariah couldn't sleep. She stared at the high ceiling of the warehouse, where some missing tiles allowed patches of the night sky to be visible. She thought about how she had gotten here. 6 months ago she had a different life. She wasn't rich, but she had a small apartment, a job as a saleswoman in a clothing store, and even a few friends. But then Raphael entered her life. At first he seemed perfect, attentive, affectionate, always with sweet words and promises of a better future. Mariah, alone since her mother passed away when Isabel was only 2, fell in love quickly. Raphael moved into her apartment after only 3 months of dating, and that's when everything changed. The sweet words turned into constant criticism. The attention became obsessive control. Raphael wanted to know where she was every minute, who she spoke to, what she did. He started forbidding her from seeing the few friends she had. Then he forced her to quit her job, saying that a good woman should stay home and take care of her daughter. Isolated, financially dependent on him, Mariah found herself trapped. And then the fits of rage began. Raphael never touched Isabel, but Mariah bore more and more marks hidden under her long clothes. She tried to get help, but Raphael had friends in important places. When she went to the police station, the officer on duty knew Raphael and sent her back home, saying that couples' problems should be solved at home. The last straw came when Raphael started looking at Isabel differently. Mariah noticed it in his expressions, in his ambiguous comments, in the way he started to be alone with the girl when she went out shopping. One desperate night, while Raphael slept drunk on the sofa, Mariah took Isabel, a few belongings in a bag, and fled. She didn't go back to the apartment. She knew, if she did, it would be worse. Raphael had the keys, her documents, control over everything. She had nowhere to go. Her friends had drifted away after months of being cut out of her life. She had no family. She had no money other than a few bills secretly saved over the months. She slept in public shelters for the first few weeks, but they were temporary and always crowded. Then she discovered the abandoned warehouse. It wasn't safe, it wasn't dignified, but it was a roof over their heads. She managed to find some informal work, odd cleaning jobs, but the money was barely enough for basic food, and so they had been for 3 months, surviving, just surviving. Mariah knew she needed new documents, she needed legal help, she needed so many things, but the system was complex and hostile to someone with no fixed address, no proof of income, nothing but a daughter to protect and a fierce will not to give up. Tears streamed silently down Mariah's face again as she hugged a sleeping Isabel. She whispered into the darkness, to no one but herself, a prayer without faith but full of desperation. Please, if there's anyone listening, please help us. I can handle anything. But my daughter deserves more than this. She deserves to be a child. She deserves to smile. She deserves to live without fear. Please. Outside the warehouse, Thomas had returned to his car, parked a few blocks away. He sat in the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. He stayed there, hands on the steering wheel, his gaze lost on the windshield. The images of the day played on a loop in his mind. Mariah's face in the patisserie, Isabel's silent tears, Edward's cruel smile, the empty warehouse, the birthday song without a cake. For the first time in 3 years, Thomas Miller felt he had a purpose. He didn't know exactly what it was yet. He didn't have a plan, but he knew he couldn't turn his back on this. Something had to be done. Something was going to be done. He took out his phone and reviewed the video he had recorded. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was enough. It captured the cruelty, the humiliation, the injustice. He put the phone back in his pocket and finally started the car. As he drove back to his apartment in Lincoln Park, Thomas made mental plans. First, he needed to better understand Mariah and Isabel's situation. Second, he needed to find out more about Edward and the patisserie. Third, he needed to think of a way to help without scaring them, without seeming intrusive or threatening. But first of all, the next morning he would return to that warehouse, just to make sure they were okay, just to make sure it hadn't been a nightmare, but a reality he was now a part of. The Chicago night continued its indifferent course. Millions of people slept in their comfortable beds, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the city's margins. But for 3 people that night, Mariah in her warehouse, Thomas in his car, and even Edward in his comfortable home, Something had changed irrevocably. None of them knew it yet, but their lives were about to intertwine in ways no one could have predicted, and the story that was just beginning would transform not only these 3 lives, but many others that would be touched along the way. The first chapter of that story had closed, but it was only the beginning. The morning arrived cold and grey over Chicago. Thomas woke up before his alarm, which was no surprise considering he had only slept a few hours. Thoughts of Mariah and Isabel had kept him awake for most of the night, spinning restlessly in his mind. He got up, made coffee he didn't drink, and stared out his apartment window as the city slowly awakened. By 7:30 in the morning, he was already in his car, driving toward the warehouse. He stopped at a supermarket on the way and bought a few things: fresh bread, milk, fruit, cookies, juice. Nothing too elaborate, nothing that could seem ostentatious. Just the basics anyone needed to start the day. He put everything in a simple cloth bag and continued his journey. When he reached the vicinity of the warehouse, he parked the car at a safe distance and walked the rest of the way. The neighborhood had a different look during the day. It was still run down, still showed the scars of urban inequality, but there was movement. People going to work, children on their way to school, street vendors starting their day. Life happened here too, just differently. Thomas approached the warehouse carefully, not wanting to frighten anyone. It was then that he saw Mariah emerging from the opening that served as a door. She looked even more tired than the day before, if that was possible. She wore the same clothes and carried a plastic bag in her hands. Isabel was not with her. Mariah looked around carefully before starting to walk. She didn't notice Thomas hidden behind a wall across the street. He watched her walk away quickly, probably in search of some work or food. He waited until she turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Then Thomas did something that would normally make him uncomfortable. He approached the warehouse and, with extreme care, left the bag of food right at the entrance, where Mariah would surely see it upon her return. Inside the bag, besides the groceries, was a small handwritten note in simple, direct letters. "You are not alone." Thomas moved away quickly, returned to his car, and watched from a distance. He didn't know how long Mariah would be gone, but he wanted to make sure she found the bag. While he waited, he took out his phone and revisited the video from the patisserie. He watched it again, paying attention to every detail: the sign on the wall with the establishment's name, Edward's face, the expressions of the other employees. It was then that something caught his attention. In the reflection of the glass window, for just a second, it was possible to see the logo stamped on a packaging box on the counter. Sweet Charm Network. It wasn't just one patisserie. It was part of a chain. Thomas did a quick search on his phone and found the company's website. 17 stores spread across Chicago and the metropolitan area. A large established company with a carefully crafted image of tradition and quality. There was fair tab on the website about social responsibility. Pretty photos of donations to institutions, elaborate text about commitment to the community, values like respect and dignity. Thomas felt the irony burn. Those pompous words meant nothing when a manager humiliated a desperate mother in front of her daughter. He continued investigating. He looked for information about the owners of the chain, the company structure, customer complaints. He was so engrossed in his research that he almost didn't notice when Mariah finally returned. It was almost 10 in the morning. He saw her approach the warehouse entrance and stop abruptly upon seeing the bag. Mariah looked around, confused and scared. Who would have left that there? She picked up the bag carefully, as if it might explode, and peeked at the contents. Her hands trembled when she saw the fresh food. Then she found the note. From the car, Thomas saw Mariah's face go through several emotions in seconds: confusion, fear, hope, tears. She read the note several times, then pressed the paper against her chest. She quickly entered the warehouse with the bag. Thomas sighed. He had taken the first step. Now he needed to think about the next one. He couldn't just show up and introduce himself. Mariah had every reason to be suspicious of strangers, especially men. He needed to be careful, patient, strategic. He spent the rest of the day alternating between researching the Sweet Charm network and thinking about how to approach Mariah without scaring her. At night, he returned to the warehouse. This time, he waited until he was sure they were both asleep before leaving another bag. This one contained a small, simple chocolate cake, bought at a different bakery far from the Gold Coast, and another note. For the birthday girl. You deserve to celebrate. With love, a friend. In the following days, Thomas established a routine. Every morning or night, when Mariah went out looking for work or when they were both asleep, he would leave something. Sometimes it was food, other times clean clothes bought in simple stores so as not to attract attention. One day he left new blankets, another day toiletries, always with a short, comforting note, never invasive. Mariah was confused and scared at first. Who was this person? What did they want? Was it safe to accept these things? But her need was greater than her fear. Isabel was eating better, sleeping warmer. As a mother, Mariah couldn't refuse help that benefited her daughter, even if it came from a stranger. She tried to stay awake some nights to catch her benefactor in the act, but she never succeeded. Thomas was too careful. He wore dark clothes, arrived at irregular times, never made a sound. He was like a kind ghost who appeared and disappeared, leaving gifts. Meanwhile, Thomas continued his investigation into the Sweet Charm network. He discovered that the company had been founded 20 years ago by an entrepreneur who had started as a simple baker. The official story spoke of hard work, overcoming adversity, the American dream realized. But Thomas wanted to know more. Who was the current owner? How was the company managed? What was the internal culture? He began visiting other stores in the chain, always as a regular customer. He observed how employees treated different types of people. Some stores were better than others, but there was a pattern. Well-dressed customers received smiles and attention. Simpler-looking ones were served with haste and coldness. It wasn't as blatant as Edward, but the discrimination was there, subtle and systemic. A week after the easy incident at the Gold Coast patisserie, Thomas decided it was time to take the next step. He needed to introduce himself to Mariah, gain her trust, and better understand her situation so he could truly help. But how could he do that without seeming like a creepy stranger? He thought carefully. He mentally wrote and rewrote what he would say. In the end, he decided on honesty. He would be direct about having seen the incident at the patisserie, about wanting to help, about having no ulterior motives. He hoped Mariah could see the sincerity in his eyes. On a sunny afternoon, rare for a Chicago autumn, Thomas went to the warehouse at a time when he knew Mariah would be there. This time he didn't hide. He approached the entrance and knocked lightly on the metal structure, announcing his presence. "Who's there?" Mariah's voice came from inside, tense and frightened. "My name is Thomas. I'm the person who's been leaving the bags. Please don't be afraid. I just want to talk." There was a long silence. Thomas could hear whispers inside the warehouse, Mariah probably telling Isabel to be quiet and hide. Finally, Mariah appeared at the entrance. She kept a safe distance, and her eyes showed a mix of gratitude and suspicion. "Why are you doing this?" she asked directly. "What do you want?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I saw what happened at the patisserie. I saw how that man treated you and your daughter, and I couldn't forget it. Since then, I've just wanted to help." Mariah narrowed her eyes. "Are you a cop? Social services? Are you going to try to take my daughter from me?" "No. God, no. I'm just someone who couldn't stand by and do nothing. I know it seems strange. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I swear I want nothing more than to help you two get out of this situation. And why should I believe you? You're a strange man. I know nothing about you." Thomas understood her reaction. In Mariah's situation, he would react the same way. "You're absolutely right to be suspicious. Look, I know this doesn't prove anything, but here." He took his wallet from his pocket and showed her his ID. "This is me, Thomas Miller. I'm 40 years old. I work in business consulting. I live in Lincoln Park. I have no criminal record. I can give you any information you want about me." Mariah looked at the ID but didn't approach to take it. Thomas continued. "I know words don't mean much, I know you've learned not to trust, but I also recorded what happened at the patisserie. I have the video, and I want to do something about it, not just for you, but so that it doesn't happen to anyone else." "You recorded it?" Mariah's voice trembled. "Why?" "Because sometimes people only believe what they see. And because what that manager did was wrong. Completely wrong. No. One deserves to be treated like that." Mariah was silent, processing. Thomas could see the internal struggle reflected on her face, the need for help battling against years of distrust and bad experiences. "I don't want charity," she said finally. "I don't want to be treated like a pity case. I've been through that before, and it didn't end well." "It's not charity. It's justice. It's dignity. It's the minimum any human being deserves." Thomas paused. "Look, I know you don't know me. I don't expect you to trust me immediately, but let me at least explain what I'd like to do. If you don't want to, I'll respect that and disappear from your life, but at least hear me out." Mariah glanced back into the warehouse where Isabel was surely hiding. Then she looked back at Thomas. Her eyes were moist, but her voice was firm. "Talk, but stay there. Don't come any closer." Thomas nodded and began to explain. He talked about wanting to help her find safe temporary housing, about filing for a restraining order against Raphael, about getting new documents, about job possibilities. He spoke slowly, clearly, giving Mariah time to absorb each piece of information. "And how much will all of this cost?" Mariah asked suspiciously. "Because I don't have any money, I already told you." "It won't cost you anything. I have resources, I have contacts, and I want to do this. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but because it's the right thing to do. Nobody does anything for free. Everyone wants something." "I did want something," Thomas admitted. "I wanted to feel human again. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Since then, I've been living on autopilot. Work, go home, sleep, repeat. No purpose, no connection. When I saw you and your daughter at the patisserie, something woke up in me. I remembered that there's more to life than just surviving. There's helping. There's making a difference." Mariah wiped away the tears that were starting to fall. "And if I accept, how will it work? You really won't want anything in return?" "Nothing. Just your safety and your daughter's. Just the chance to help you rebuild your lives." There was a long silence. The distant sound of cars on the avenue and the wind rattling the warehouse roof were the only noises. Mariah was clearly struggling with the decision. Thomas waited patiently without pressing her. Finally, Mariah spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "Okay, I accept, but on one condition. You don't do anything without telling me first. No surprises, no decisions for me. I'm her mother. I decide." "Of course, absolutely. You're in control. I'm just here to facilitate things." Mariah nodded slowly. "And the apartment? You said temporary housing. What would that be like?" "I have a small apartment that was rented out but became vacant last month. Nothing luxurious, but it has 2 bedrooms, a fully equipped kitchen, a full bathroom. It's furnished. You can stay there as long as you need without paying rent, until you can get back on your feet." "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Thomas hesitated, then decided on the whole truth. "Because when my wife was sick, in her final months, I saw how cruel the world can be to those who are vulnerable. I saw how people look at you differently, how they treat you differently, and I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to be different, to be the kind of person who helps instead of turning away, I would. This is my chance." Mariah looked into his eyes for a long moment, searching for signs of lies, manipulation, danger, but all she saw was exhaustion, sadness, and sincerity. Finally, she nodded. "When can we go see this apartment?" "Now, if you want. Or tomorrow. Whenever you feel ready." Mariah glanced behind her again. "Isabel, you can come here." A small, thin girl with large, frightened eyes appeared timidly beside her mother. She was clutching an old, worn-out teddy bear as if it were her only security in the world. Thomas knelt down to her eye level and smiled gently. "Hi, Isabel. My name is Thomas. Your mom is right to be wary of strangers. It's very important. But I promise I only want to help you both. Okay?" Isabel didn't answer. just hid behind Mariah's leg. Thomas stood up. "Let's do this. I'll pick you up here tomorrow morning. You'll come with me to see the apartment. If you like it, you stay. If you don't, I'll bring you back, and we'll think of another plan. No pressure, no obligation. What do you think?" Mariah agreed. "But then you have to explain this thing about the video, what you're going to do with it." "I'll explain everything, I promise." And so, with suspicion still present but also with a spark of hope, Mariah agreed to take the first step out of the abandoned warehouse that had been her refuge and her prison for the last few months. Thomas spent the rest of that day and the entire night preparing the apartment. He cleaned everything meticulously. He filled the refrigerator with nutritious food. He put clean sheets on the beds. He bought new clothes for Mariah and Isabel, estimating their sizes. He left toiletries in the bathroom. He placed fresh flowers in a vase in the living room. He wanted them to feel welcome, safe at home. The next morning he arrived at the warehouse with his car. Mariah and Isabel were waiting outside with their few possessions in a plastic bag. They looked small and frightened, but also hopeful. The drive to the apartment was silent. Isabel sat in the back seat hugging her teddy bear, Mariah in the front with her hands clasped in her lap. Thomas didn't force conversation, understanding that they needed time to process everything. The apartment was in an old but well-maintained building in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. Nothing ostentatious but clean and safe. When Thomas opened the door and invited them in, Mariah stopped at the threshold, momentarily paralyzed. In front of her was something she hadn't seen in months. A home. Simple, but complete. A comfortable sofa in the living room, a wooden dining table, a kitchen with all the appliances working, a bathroom with hot water, 2 bedrooms with real beds, not blankets on the floor. Isabel went in first, her wide eyes scanning every corner. She ran to one of the bedrooms and saw a bed with colorful sheets, a few new stuffed animals waiting on the pillow. She turned to her mother with an expression of pure joy that Mariah hadn't seen in far too long. "Mommy, look! A princess bed!" Mariah entered slowly, still processing. She walked through the apartment, lightly touching things, as if afraid everything would disappear if she touched it too hard. She reached the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. It was full. Fruits, vegetables, milk, juice, meat, cheese. There was everything. The tears came without warning. Mariah covered her face with her hands and sobbed, years of tension, fear, and exhaustion finally finding release. Thomas stood at a respectful distance, not trying to comfort her physically, just saying softly that it was okay, that she could cry, that she was safe now. Isabel ran to her mother and hugged her. Mariah knelt and hugged her daughter tightly, whispering between sobs, "It's going to be okay, we're going to be okay." Thomas waited until Mariah had calmed down. Then he explained the practical details. The apartment keys were theirs. The electricity, water, and gas bills were in his name, and he would continue to pay them until she could take over. There were clothes in the closets that he had estimated the sizes for, but if they didn't fit, they could be exchanged. The apartment had Wi-Fi. He would leave his phone number in case they needed anything. "And what about the documents?" Mariah asked, drying her tears. "And the restraining order?" "I have a lawyer friend. He's going to help us. But I need you to tell me the whole story, from the beginning, so he knows how to proceed." Mariah hesitated, but then nodded. "I'll tell you. But let me give Isabel a bath first. Let her eat something, then we can talk." "Of course. Make yourselves at home. I'll step out to give you some privacy. I'll be back in a few hours, okay?" Thomas left the apartment and went to sit at a nearby cafe. As he drank an espresso he could finally enjoy, he thought about all the next steps. He needed to talk to Daniel, his lawyer. He needed to think about the patisserie and the video. He needed to give Mariah and Isabel time to adjust before moving forward. But mostly, Thomas realized something important. For the first time in 3 years since Claire had passed, he felt alive. He had a purpose. He had something beyond himself to worry about. And he realized that maybe, just maybe, helping Mariah and Isabel was helping to heal his own wounds too. The first 2 weeks in the apartment were a mixture of adjustment and healing. Mariah and Isabel slept more than they thought possible, as if their bodies were recovering from months of poorly slept nights in the cold warehouse. Hot showers became a daily luxury that Mariah never took for granted. Isabel, little by little, started being a child again. She ran around the living room, watched cartoons on television, and drew with the colored pencils Thomas had left for her. Thomas visited the apartment every 2 or 3 days, always calling ahead, always respecting boundaries. He brought groceries, talked about the next steps, but mostly he listened. Mariah began to open up gradually, telling her story in pieces, as if each revelation were a wound being slowly exposed to the air to heal. She talked about Raphael, about how he had turned love into control, attention into obsession, about the marks she had never shown anyone, about the constant fear she had lived with for months, and especially about the day she decided that no fear would be greater than letting her daughter grow up in that toxic environment. Thomas listened without judging, without interrupting. He took notes when necessary, thinking of the information Daniel, his lawyer, would need, but mostly he was just present, and his presence, his genuine attention, was something Mariah hadn't received in a very long time. Daniel Smith was a 43-year-old lawyer, specializing in family law and restraining orders. Thomas had known him for over 10 years, since they had worked together on a complex corporate succession case. When Thomas called and explained the situation, Daniel didn't hesitate to take the case pro bono. The first meeting between Mariah and Daniel took place in the apartment. Mariah was nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she held a cup of tea Thomas had prepared. Isabel was in her room watching cartoons, shielded from a conversation she shouldn't have to hear. Daniel was a tall, thin man with glasses and dark hair starting to gray. He had a calm, professional presence that immediately put people at ease. He explained the restraining order process with patience, using simple terms, ensuring Mariah understood every step. "We're going to need some documents," Daniel explained, "but I understand you lost a lot when you left home. We'll start by getting duplicates, your ID, social security card, birth certificates. I'm also going to file an emergency motion for a restraining order. Raphael will have to maintain a minimum distance from you and Isabel. He won't be able to approach you, contact you, nothing. If he violates it, he can be arrested." "What if he finds out where I am?" Mariah asked, her voice trembling. "He has friends, he has influence. He said if I ever tried to run, he would find me. The address of this apartment is not linked to your name. You're safe here. And once the order is approved, any violation will be a crime. I will ensure that." "How long will it take?" "For the restraining order, in urgent cases like yours, we can have a response in days. For the documents, a few weeks, but we'll work quickly. You have my number. Anything, any strange movement, you call me immediately. Understood?" Mariah nodded, still tense but a little more confident. Thomas watched the interaction, pleased that he had chosen Daniel for the case. He knew his lawyer friend would handle Mariah's situation with the seriousness and sensitivity she deserved. While Daniel worked on the legal processes, Thomas advanced on another front. He had spent the last 2 weeks meticulously investigating the Sweet Charm network, and the more he discovered, the more disturbed he became. Edward Travers, the manager who had humiliated Mariah, was not an isolated case. Through research on social media, complaint forums, and discreet conversations with former employees, Thomas uncovered a systematic pattern of discrimination and mistreatment. Customers from lower social classes were routinely treated with contempt. Employees who dared to complain were fired. There were even reports of questionable labor practices, such as unpaid overtime and hostile work environments. But what surprised Thomas the most was discovering who really owned the chain. Through public records and a few strategic calls, he found that the Sweet Charm network belonged to a larger corporate group, controlled by a holding company, and the holding company, ironically, was run by a single primary owner. Someone who, according to public information, had a story of overcoming adversity, someone who supposedly valued dignity and respect. Thomas decided it was time to do something with the video. But he didn't just want to expose Edward. He wanted systemic change. He wanted the very structure of the company to be questioned and transformed. And for that, he needed a careful strategy. First, he contacted Clara, the patisserie employee who had witnessed the humiliation. It took some time to find her, but when he did, he discovered that she had kept her own record of the incident. Clara had recorded part of the scene on her cell phone, horrified by Edward's behavior, but lacking the courage to intervene at the time. They met at a cafe far from the patisserie. Clara was a young woman with sad eyes and the tired posture of someone who works too hard for too little. When Thomas explained his plans, she hesitated. "If I help, I'll lose my job," she said. "And I need this job. I can't afford to be unemployed." "What if I guarantee you won't be?" Thomas proposed. "And what if there's real change in the company, a change that benefits not only you, but all employees and customers? How can you guarantee that?" "Trust me, I have a plan, but I need your help, your video, and your courage." Clara thought for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, but not just for me, for all the times I saw wrong things happen at that patisserie and couldn't do anything." Thomas spent the next few days refining his plan. He needed perfect timing. He needed the element of surprise. And most importantly, he needed to ensure the impact would be big enough to force real change. Meanwhile, in the apartment, Mariah and Isabel's life was beginning to take shape. Mariah started online courses in customer service and basic computer skills, abilities she knew she would need to re-enter the job market. Thomas had paid for the course enrollments and lent her his old laptop so she could study. Isabel went back to school. Thomas helped Mariah with enrollment at a public school near the apartment. Seeing Isabel leave in the morning with a new backpack, a clean uniform and a full lunchbox was one of the most emotional moments for Mariah since everything had begun. Meals in the apartment became a ritual. Thomas started showing up for dinner a few times a week. At first it was awkward. 3 people who barely knew each other sitting at the table trying to make conversation. But gradually the tension eased. Isabel began to talk more, telling them about school, about the friends she was making, about the things she was learning. Thomas found himself genuinely smiling for the first time in years. He found himself looking forward to the dinners, to the moments of domestic normality he had lost when Claire passed. Mariah also began to relax, her shoulders no longer permanently tense, her face occasionally lit up by real smiles. One of those nights, after Isabel had gone to bed, Mariah and Thomas were talking in the living room. The television was off, only a dim lamp illuminating the room. There was a growing intimacy between them, not necessarily romantic, but of mutual understanding, of wounded souls recognizing each other. "Can I ask you something?" Mariah said softly. "About your wife. You said she passed 3 years ago. What happened, if it's not too invasive?" Thomas was silent for a moment. It had been a long time since he had spoken about Claire to anyone. "She had cancer. We found out too late. It was 8 months between the diagnosis and the end. 8 months of treatments, hopes, disappointments. I watched the woman I loved waste away, suffer, transform into someone I barely recognized, and in the end I was so focused on being strong for her that I forgot to process my own pain. I'm so sorry. After she was gone, I just shut down. I kept working because I had to. I kept living because I was breathing, but I wasn't really present. Until that day at the patisserie. When I saw you and Isabel, something broke inside me. Or maybe something was fixed. I can't quite explain it." Mariah lightly touched his arm, a small but significant gesture. "I think we met at the right time. You saved me, Thomas, you really did. But I think maybe we're saving each other." Thomas looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. Mariah was no longer the broken woman from the patisserie. There were still marks, there was still pain, but there was also strength. There was life returning to her eyes, and Thomas realized she was right. Somehow helping Mariah and Isabel was helping to heal him too. 2.5 weeks after they moved into the apartment, Daniel called with news. The restraining order had been approved. Raphael was legally prohibited from approaching Mariah and Isabel, from contacting them in any way, under penalty of immediate arrest. A minimum distance was established. Any violation would be treated as a serious crime. Mariah cried when she heard the news. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. For the first time in over a year, she felt legally protected. It didn't mean the fear had completely disappeared, but it was a huge step. The new documents also began to arrive. ID, social security card, birth certificates. Mariah was reclaiming her official identity, her legal existence, in the system. With documents in hand, she could think about formal employment, opening a bank account, truly rebuilding her life. It was then that Thomas decided it was time to execute his plan regarding the patisserie. Everything was aligned. He had his video, Clara's video, he had information about the company's structure, he had contacts who could help spread the story. But there was something else he wanted to do first. He wanted to confront Edward personally. On a Tuesday morning, Thomas walked into the Sweet Charm patisserie on the Gold Coast. Edward was behind the counter, overseeing the slow morning traffic. He didn't recognize Thomas immediately. Customers were anonymous faces to him, especially those who didn't stand out for obvious wealth. "Good morning," Thomas said calmly. "I'd like to speak with the manager." "That's me. How can I help you?" Thomas looked around. There were only 2 other customers in the store, browsing the menu. Perfect. "I was here a few weeks ago. I witnessed a scene that made me very uncomfortable." Edward narrowed his eyes, trying to remember. "What scene?" "A woman and a little girl. The woman asked if you had anything you were going to throw out, and you humiliated her in front of her daughter, in front of everyone." Recognition flickered across Edward's face, quickly followed by a defensive expression. "Oh, that. Look, I was just doing my job. We can't be giving things away for free. It's company policy." "Company policy," Thomas repeated, his voice gaining a sharp edge. "Is it company policy to humiliate vulnerable people? To mock a mother trying to get food for her daughter on her birthday?" "Listen here," Edward said, his voice rising. "I don't know who you think you are, but I won't accept this kind of accusation. If you didn't like what you saw, you can leave and never come back." "Oh, I'm going to do more than that," Thomas said calmly, taking his phone out of his pocket. "I recorded everything, every word, every gesture. And I wasn't the only one. One of your employees recorded it too. We both have evidence of what you did." Edward's face went pale. "Are you threatening me?" "No, I'm informing you. Tomorrow, this video will go public. It will go on social media. It will go to the news. It will go everywhere. People can see the kind of person you are. And when that happens, it will be interesting to see how your bosses react. You can't do that. I'll sue you for defamation." Defamation implies a lie. Everything in the video is true. Your own words, your own actions. And honestly, Edward, after everything you did to that woman and her daughter, do you really think you deserve any protection? Edward was visibly shaken now. The other customers in the store had stopped pretending not to listen and were watching the scene openly. Clara emerged from the kitchen, having heard Edward's raised voice. When she saw Thomas, her eyes widened in recognition. "Look, maybe we can talk about this," Edward said, trying to regain control. "Maybe I was a little rude, but it's not that big of a deal. We can resolve this civilly." "There's nothing to resolve between us," Thomas said. "But there's a lot to be resolved between you, this company, and all the people you've mistreated over the years. And tomorrow, that conversation is going to begin. Publicly." Thomas turned to leave. At the door, he stopped and looked back. "Oh, and Edward, that woman. She's doing well now, in spite of you, in spite of everything. She's rebuilding her life. I just thought you should know." He left the patisserie, leaving Edward pale and trembling. The other customers began to whisper among themselves. Clara stood still, a small, satisfied smile beginning to form on her lips. She knew the storm was coming, and secretly she was looking forward to it. That night, Thomas gathered Mariah, Daniel, and Clara at the apartment. Isabel was asleep in her room, oblivious to the meeting happening in the living room. Thomas explained his plan in detail. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I'm going to post the video on social media. Not just mine, but Clara's as well. I'll tag journalists who cover social issues, I'll use relevant hashtags, I'll do everything I can to ensure maximum visibility. The story will spread. I'm sure of it." "And then what?" Mariah asked. "What happens next?" "Then we wait. The owner of the chain will have to respond. The media will apply pressure. Customers will react. The company will be forced to take a position. And if I'm right about who the real owner is, if my information is correct, I think we'll see an interesting response." "Who is the owner?" Clara asked. "I've worked there for 6 months and I've never seen him." "I'd rather not say yet. I want to see how things unfold, but let's just say his story could make this situation even more impactful." Mariah looked at Thomas with concern. "Are you sure about this? It won't cause problems for you?" "I've made my decision. This needs to be done. For you, for all the other people who've been treated this way, and so that maybe, just maybe, something will actually change." The next morning, Thomas woke up early. He reviewed the video last time, made sure the caption was clear and impactful, and checked all the tags and hashtags. At 8 in the morning, he hit publish. The video showed everything. Mariah and Isabel's timid arrival at the patisserie, Mariah's gentle request, Edward's cruel outburst, Isabel's silent tears, the bill falling from her pocket. It was all there, captured in high definition, impossible to deny or distort. Thomas's caption was direct and emotional. It told the story without revealing Mariah's full identity, protecting her privacy, but making it clear what had happened and where. It ended with a simple but powerful question. Is this how we want companies to treat people in need? Is this the world we want to live in? In the first few hours, the video got a few shares, then dozens, then hundreds. By noon, it was viral. Thousands of people had watched, commented, and shared. Journalists started calling Thomas for interviews. The Sweet Charm Network began receiving furious calls and negative comments on all its social media pages. By 3 in the afternoon, the Gold Coast patisserie was surrounded by reporters. Edward had been instructed by corporate not to make any statements, but that only made the situation worse. Silence was interpreted as an admission of guilt. By 5 in the afternoon, the holding company that controlled the Sweet Charm Network issued an official statement. It was brief, generic, and promised an internal investigation. But it wasn't enough. The public wanted action, not empty words. And then at 7 in the evening, something unexpected happened. A man walked into the Gold Coast patisserie. He was tall, distinguished-looking, wearing a simple but elegant suit. He was not a regular customer. He was accompanied by discreet security guards and a lawyer. The cameras of the reporters still outside captured his arrival. Inside the patisserie, Edward was exhausted. It had been one of the worst days of his life. When he saw who had entered, his face grew even paler, because Edward knew exactly who that man was, and he knew his career had just ended. The man wasted no time. In a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, including the reporters who were starting to file in behind him, he introduced himself, and when he said his name, when he revealed his identity, the impact was seismic. Not just in the patisserie, but throughout the city, the entire network, and the whole unfolding story. Because that man was the true owner of the Sweet Charm Network, and his history, his origins, made everything infinitely more significant. "My name is Robert Andrews. I am the owner of the Sweet Charm Network." The words echoed through the patisserie, followed by a stunned silence. Reporters raised their cameras and microphones, capturing every second. Edward felt his legs weaken. Clara, watching from behind the counter, widened her eyes in shock. No one expected the owner himself to show up in person, much less so quickly after the video went viral. Robert Andrews was 58 years old with a face that told stories, deep wrinkles around his eyes, hands calloused from decades of hard work. He had started as a baker at 14, working in his father's bakery in Englewood, one of Chicago's most struggling neighborhoods. He had built his empire brick by brick, dawn by dawn, with sweat and determination. His story was known in the business world as an example of overcoming adversity. A poor boy who became a successful entrepreneur. But what few knew, what rarely came up in polished interviews and corporate profiles, was that Robert had never forgotten where he came from. He still regularly visited the neighborhood where he grew up. He still kept in touch with the people he had known when he had nothing. And now, for the first time, he was discovering that the company he had built with so much sacrifice had become something that betrayed his fundamental values. Robert turned to Edward, His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the manager instinctively recoil. "I saw the video. I saw what you did. I saw how you treated a mother and her daughter. A mother who only wanted to feed her child on her birthday. And you chose to humiliate her. In my patisserie, using the name I built." "Mr. Andrews, Edward tried to speak, but Robert raised a hand, silencing him. "No, you will not justify yourself. There is no justification." He turned to the reporters, speaking directly to the cameras. "I built this company from nothing. My father was a baker. My mother, a cleaning lady. I grew up watching my family struggle. I know what it's like to have nothing. I know what hunger is. I know the humiliation of having to ask for help, and being treated as less than human." He paused, letting the words resonate. "When I opened my first bakery, I made a vow that I would never, ever be the kind of person who turns their back on someone in need, that my business would be built on respect, dignity, and compassion. But I see now that as the company grew, as I distanced myself from the shop floor, I allowed that culture to be lost. And that is unacceptable." Robert turned back to Edward. "You are fired. Effective immediately. Collect your belongings and leave. My legal department will be in contact regarding the formal procedures." Edward opened his mouth to protest, but saw something in Robert's eyes that made him shut it. He knew there was no coming back. With robotic movements, he gathered a few personal items from behind the counter and left the patisserie under the glare of the cameras and the customers who had gathered to watch the events unfold. Robert then addressed the reporters again. "Starting today, all units of the Sweet Charm network will implement a new policy. All food that is near its expiration date, every product that would normally be discarded, will be donated. We will establish partnerships with shelters, community centers, and organizations that serve vulnerable populations. No food will be thrown away while there are people going hungry in our city." There was a murmur among the reporters. Robert continued. "Furthermore, I am creating a social responsibility department within the company, a department that will not be just for show, but will have real decision-making power and a significant budget. We will train all our employees in humane customer service. We will create anonymous channels for reporting discrimination. We will make this company what it always should have been. A place that reflects the values upon which it was founded." A reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Andrews, will you try to contact the woman from the video? Will you apologize to her personally?" Robert hesitated for a moment. "I would like to, but I understand she has been through a trauma. If she wants to maintain her privacy, I completely respect that. But yes, if it's possible, I would like to apologize personally and offer any support she and her daughter may need." He then turned to Clara, who was still standing behind the counter in shock. "What's your name?" "Clara, sir, Clara Mendes." "How long have you worked here?" 6 months, sir." "And you witnessed what happened?" "Yes. And I recorded part of the video, too. I couldn't believe what I was seeing." Robert nodded. "You are exactly the kind of employee this company needs. Someone who recognizes right from wrong. Someone who has moral courage even when it's difficult." He paused. "I am offering you the position of coordinator for the new Social Responsibility Department, if you'll accept, of course." Clara was flabbergasted. Sir, I haven't even finished college. I only did 2 years of business administration before I had to stop to work." "I don't need a diploma. I need heart. I need someone who understands what it means to be on the other side of the counter. Do you accept?" Clara felt tears of emotion well up in her eyes. Yes, I accept." The news spread like wildfire. The video, already viral, gained a second wave of attention with Robert's response. Newspapers, television, social media, everyone was talking about the entrepreneur who not only acknowledged the mistake but took immediate and dramatic action. Robert's story, his humble origins, his rise, and now his response to the crisis, captured the public's imagination. In the Lincoln Park apartment, Mariah watched everything on television, her hands covering her mouth in shock. Thomas was by her side, equally surprised by the speed and intensity of the response. Isabel was asleep in her room, unaware that her story was changing not only her life, but potentially the lives of many others. "I can't believe it," Mariah whispered. He really did it. Fired the man, changed the entire company's policy. Robert Andrews is not just any entrepreneur, Thomas said. I researched him. He really did come from nothing, and apparently he hasn't forgotten his roots. Thomas's phone rang. It was Daniel. Turn on the TV, the press conference is live. Robert Andrews just asked to speak with you. I'm already watching. How does he know who I am? Your name was on the video post, and he has the resources to find information. Wait, he's speaking again. On the television, Robert had turned back to the cameras. I would like to speak directly to Thomas Miller, the man who recorded and posted the original video. Mr. Miller, I know you're probably watching. I would like to meet with you. Not to confront you, but to thank you. You exposed a problem that I should have seen but didn't, and now, thanks to your courage, I can correct it. Please, get in touch. Mariah looked at Thomas. Are you going to? I think so, but I'm not going alone. You're coming with me if you feel comfortable, of course. It's your story, too. Mariah hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready to meet this man, to face all of this again. You don't have to decide now. Think about it. And if you decide you want to go, I'll be by your side. If you decide you don't want to, that's okay too. Mariah spent a sleepless night thinking. Part of her wanted to hide, to maintain her privacy, to never think about that horrible day at the patisserie again. But another part, a part that had been growing since she moved into the apartment, since she started rebuilding her life, wanted to face the situation. She wanted to look the owner of that company in the eye and speak her truth. The next morning, over coffee, she announced her decision. I'm going. I want to go. I need to go. Thomas nodded. Then we'll go together. The meeting was set for 2 days later at a neutral location, a discreet hotel in the city center, in a private meeting room, Thomas, Mariah, and Daniel on one side, Robert, his lawyer, and Clara on the other. The press was not invited. It was a time for a genuine conversation, without performing for cameras. Mariah was visibly nervous. She wore simple but clean clothes, bought with the money she had earned from her first odd jobs since settling into the apartment. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup. Her face bare, vulnerable but determined. When Robert entered the room, Mariah felt her stomach turn, but instead of the powerful, intimidating man she expected, she saw someone who seemed genuinely ashamed and regretful. Robert walked over to her and, keeping a respectful distance, spoke with a choked voice. Ma'am, I don't have enough words to express how sorry I am for what happened to you and your daughter. There is no excuse. There is no justification. What happened in that patisserie was my failure. I should have ensured that every employee, every manager, treated every person with dignity. And I failed. Mariah hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected such raw sincerity. He looked directly into her eyes, and Mariah saw something that disarmed her. She saw truth. She saw genuine shame. She saw a man confronting the worst aspect of his legacy. Mr. Andrews, Mariah began, her voice trembling slightly, I'm not here to accept empty apologies or public relations. I'm here because I want to believe that real change can happen. And it will, Robert assured her. But not just changes in the company. He hesitated, then continued. When I saw your video, when I saw you and your daughter in that patisserie, I saw my own mother. I saw all the times she had to ask for help when I was a child, all the times she was treated as less than human because she was poor. And I realized that I allowed my company to become the kind of place that caused my family so much suffering. He paused, clearing his throat. I want to do more than just change policies. I want to create real opportunities. Ma'am, if you'll allow me a personal question, are you currently employed? Mariah tensed, but Thomas gently touched her arm, encouraging her. I'm doing some odd jobs, but I don't have a steady job yet. I'm studying, taking online courses to improve my qualifications. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything honest. Customer service, sales, administration. I worked in a clothing store before I had to leave. Robert exchanged a look with Clara, then turned back to Mariah. Clara is going to coordinate our new social responsibility department. It's a big, ambitious project. She's going to need a team. People who truly understand what it means to be in a vulnerable situation. People with genuine empathy, not just theoretical. I would like to offer you a position on that team." Mariah blinked, confused. "A position? Working for you?" "Working with Clara, helping to implement the changes, visiting shelters, establishing partnerships, training employees. It would be a job with purpose and, of course, with a fair salary, full benefits, a formal contract." Mariah looked at Thomas, then at Daniel, then back at Robert. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" "Because you deserve it. Because your story, your experience has value, and because, frankly, you would be perfect for the job. No one will train our employees on empathy and dignity better than someone who has suffered the lack of it firsthand." Mariah felt tears fill her eyes. It was too much. Everything was happening too fast. I need to think. Of course, no pressure. But the offer is here." He took a card from his pocket and handed it to her. "My personal number. When you decide, give me a call." The meeting continued for another hour. They discussed the details of the donation program, the training changes, the accountability mechanisms. Robert didn't try to downplay what had happened. He didn't try to make himself the hero of the story. He acknowledged his failings and outlined concrete plans to correct them. When they finally left the hotel, Mariah was emotionally exhausted. She sat in the passenger seat of Thomas's car and let the tears fall freely. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were of relief, of hope, of possibility. "I don't know what to do," she said between sobs. "It's all so much. It's too good to be true." Thomas gently held her hand. "Then let's take it slow. You don't have to decide anything today. Let's go home, you rest, spend time with Isabel, and think it over calmly." Mariah nodded. They drove back to Lincoln Park in silence. When they arrived at the apartment, Isabel greeted them excitedly, wanting to show them a drawing she had made at school. Mariah hugged her tightly, feeling the solidity of her daughter, the reality of her present, the promise of her future. That night, after Isabel was asleep, Mariah, Thomas, and Daniel sat down to talk. Daniel reviewed the job offer from a legal standpoint, ensuring everything was correct, that there were no hidden catches. It was a legitimate offer, with a salary above the market average for the position, all legally required benefits, and a clear contract. "And you think I should take it?" Mariah asked, looking at the two men who had become an integral part of her life. "I think only you can answer that," Daniel said. "But from a practical standpoint, it's an excellent opportunity. Good salary, meaningful work, a chance to really make a difference. And personally," Thomas added, "I think you'd be amazing at the job. You have the experience, the empathy, the strength. But I also understand if you want something completely detached from the patisserie, from what happened." Mariah thought for a long moment. "You know what bothers me? I'm afraid of being seen as a charity case, as Robert Andrews' PR project, the poor woman he saved to clean up the company's image." "That's a valid concern," Daniel said, "but it could also be an opportunity to control your own narrative, to show that you're not a passive victim, but an active, strong, capable person, someone who transforms trauma into purpose." Mariah bit her lip, thinking, "Can I sleep on it one more night?" "Of course, take all the time you need." But in truth, Mariah already knew her answer. She had known from the moment Robert offered her the job. She was scared, yes. She had doubts, yes. But she also had something stronger than fear. She had hope. And a determination to turn her pain into something meaningful. The next morning, Mariah called Robert. "I accept the offer. When do I start?" The news of Mariah's hiring was made public days later, with her permission. The Sweet Charm Network issued a statement explaining that the woman from the viral video, whose identity would be protected at her request, had been hired to work in the new Social Responsibility Department. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. People praised Robert for not just talking, but acting, for not just changing policies, but changing lives. Mariah's first day of work was terrifying and exhilarating. Clara welcomed her at the network's corporate office, located in a modern building on the south side. She showed her their space, a large room with new computers, whiteboards for planning, and a small library of books on corporate social responsibility. "We'll learn together," Clara said with a smile. "I've never done this before. You've never done this before. But we're going to make it happen. In the following weeks, Mariah threw herself into the work with an energy she didn't know she still had. She visited shelters all over Chicago, talked with community center coordinators, and established partnerships. She helped create efficient donation protocols. She developed training materials for employees, and surprisingly, she discovered she was good at it. Really good. Her personal experience gave her an authenticity that no course could teach. When she trained employees on how to treat people in vulnerable situations, she spoke not from theory, but from lived experience. The employees listened. They learned. They changed. The donation program started small but grew rapidly. In the first month, the Sweet Charm Network donated over 2 tons of food. In the second month, 4 tons. Shelters that once struggled to feed their residents now had fresh bread, cakes, and pastries. Children in community centers celebrated birthdays with real cakes, no longer sad improvisations. And Mariah was at the center of it all, seeing the fruits of her labor, seeing the real difference she was making. Every time she delivered food to a shelter and saw the grateful faces, she thought of that night in the abandoned warehouse when she and Isabel had nothing. She thought of how life could change so drastically in a matter of weeks. Thomas watched Mariah's transformation with pride and admiration. She was no longer the broken woman from the patisserie. She was strong, confident, full of purpose. But more than that, she was happy. And seeing her happy made Thomas feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. It made him feel that maybe, just maybe, he could be happy again too. The meals at the apartment continued, now more frequently. Thomas, Mariah, and Isabel had developed a family dynamic, even if none of them dared to use that word yet. There was comfort in each other's presence. There were laughs, conversations, moments of pure normality that they had all forgotten were possible. One evening, after Isabel had gone to bed, Mariah and Thomas were talking on the apartment's balcony. The city stretched out before them, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. Mariah held a cup of tea, Thomas a glass of wine. The silence between them was comfortable, with no need to fill every second with words. "Can I tell you something?" Mariah said finally. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of waking up and finding out this was all a dream, that I'm still in the warehouse with Isabel, that none of this is real." Thomas looked at her, seeing the vulnerability she rarely showed. "It's real. You're here. You have a job you love. Your daughter is safe and happy. All of this is real." "I know, but sometimes it seems impossible. How did my life change so much in so little time?" "Life changes, Mariah. Sometimes for the worse. Sometimes, if we're lucky, for the better. You deserve everything good that's happening. And you, Thomas, you deserve to be happy too. But sometimes I think you forget that." Thomas took a sip of wine, thinking, "I guess I was so used to sadness that it became my comfort zone. But you and Isabel, you reminded me of what I was missing, of what life can be when you let yourself truly live." Mariah set her cup aside and gently touched Thomas's hand. "Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when no one else did. For not turning away. For giving us a chance. You changed our lives. And you changed mine." They stayed like that for a moment, hands lightly touching, looking out at the city, feeling something new and scary and wonderful growing between them. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just friendship. It was something deeper, more complex, something neither of them was ready to name yet, but both felt silently growing. 3 months after the video went viral, the Sweet Charm Network had been completely transformed. The donation program was a national success, replicated by other companies. Mariah had been promoted to manager of the Social Responsibility Department. Clara was now a director, overseeing multiple initiatives beyond donations. And Robert, the entrepreneur who could have just engaged in superficial PR, continued to invest heavily in the cultural transformation of his company. The Gold Coast Patisserie, where it all began, had been completely renovated, not just physically, but spiritually. It was now known as a place of welcome. Everyone was welcome, regardless of appearance or financial situation. A plaque on the wall listed the company's values, and the first one was dignity for all. On a Saturday afternoon, Mariah returned to that patisserie for the first time since that fateful day. She wasn't alone. Thomas and Isabel were with her. Robert had come too, at her invitation. It was important for Mariah to face that place, to redefine that space. When they entered, the new manager greeted them warmly. She was a middle-aged woman who had been personally trained by Mariah and Clara. She knew exactly who Mariah was, what had happened there. But she didn't treat Mariah with pity. She treated her with deep respect. "Welcome. It's an honor to have you here." Mariah looked around. The place was physically the same, but the energy was completely different. Customers from all social classes shared tables. Employees smiled genuinely. There was even a small corner, with tables reserved for homeless individuals who wanted to come in and rest without necessarily buying anything. Mariah felt tears fill her eyes, but this time they were tears of fulfillment, of redemption, of coming full circle. Isabel tugged at her hand, looking up with concern. "Are you okay, Mommy?" Mariah knelt and hugged her daughter. "I'm okay, my love. I'm better than okay." Robert approached. "May I say something?" Mariah nodded. "That day, when you came in here asking for help, you planted a seed of change that is growing far beyond this patisserie. Hundreds of people are being fed every day because of you. Thousands of employees are learning to treat everyone with dignity because of you. You transformed this company. You transformed my vision, and I will be eternally grateful." Mariah wiped her tears. "It wasn't just me. It was Thomas who didn't stay silent. It was Clara who was brave. It was you who chose to change instead of engaging in empty PR." She looked around one last time, then smiled. "You know what? I think we can order a cake now, a real cake, to celebrate." And so, sitting at a table in that patisserie that had been the stage for so much pain, but was now a symbol of transformation, Mariah, Isabel, Thomas, and Robert shared a cake. They laughed together. They told stories. They planned the future. And for the first time since it all began, Mariah felt she wasn't just surviving, she was living, truly living. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Mariah, Isabel, and Thomas has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, dignity, and transformation, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most in this story. Was it Mariah's courage, Thomas's kindness, or Robert's redemption? Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us of the power of compassion. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, where a new story of emotion and overcoming awaits you. Until then, and remember, small gestures of kindness can change the world.